Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. Let us know where you think we got it right and where you think we missed it completely, which you can do by going to unsilentpodcast.com or visiting us on Rumble, Facebook, or the other social channels. So let's get into it. What would you like to talk about today, Brian?
Well, today I want to talk about this moment in time that we're going through now, which may or may not be fascinating to look back on in Kenny G's time, 70 years from now or whatever. I think it's really fascinating now. And I'm going to make a couple accusations. I'm going to ask you a couple questions to make. And you got to keep me in line here, Dave. I want to make sure I don't get too far out of whack here.
Do my best.
So for those who weren't around, COVID happens in 2020. This pandemic is unleashed upon the world. And I'm not going to get into what caused it. That's not the part I'm going to focus on. This thing happens. It's a pandemic. We haven't seen one in 100 years since 1918. And we begin making decisions. We as a society and as a species on the planet begin making decisions on how we're going to handle this. And to be fair, in the beginning, we didn't really know what to do. There was like widespread panic. There was people, who were afraid to leave their house. There was a period of time where people were afraid to open their door and get posted or deliveries made at their house. And like if it was cardboard, you couldn't touch it. If it was tape, or if it was a different substance, you could. Like it was a wild time, right? There's no question. Yeah. People did not know what to do. Then, shortly after, I don't know, 6 months, whatever. You might know the timeline better than me. The vaccine is released. Like it's approved, right?
Yep.
And by this time, there was some disagreements beginning. My recollection now, 4 years later, is there's disagreements beginning to happen amongst the populace of like, well, how much of our responses should lean towards limiting people's freedoms and how much of our response should lean towards people being able to express their freedoms in a situation where we don't know. And we're openly saying we don't know how to handle this. Like there was some approaches that were more like you can't go to the beach and surf, and we're going to bring sand in to close down skate parks because God forbid you be outside. And then there was other people who were thinking like, okay, well, how about we just go out and have fresh air, and like vitamin D is like the best thing for everything. So like let's if we don't know, let's lean towards the things that have proven to work versus the other people saying we don't know. We better lean towards trying these what are now being called commonly draconian steps, right? Okay. So the vaccine comes out, and again, you tell me, you pipe in, Dave, or I'm getting this wrong if I get it wrong. Right. So the vaccine comes out, and in the beginning, it's 100% safe, it's 100% effective. If you get this, the vaccine stops with you, right?
Yeah.
Hold on. I think I missed one. In the beginning, you couldn't get it if you got the vaccine, right? Is that how it went? In the beginning,
it was supposed to stop the spread. Yeah. That was the idea. It was going to stop the spread.
But you couldn't get it if you had the vaccine. And then that, within a few weeks, that went away, and you couldn't spread it. Like you might get it, but you couldn't spread it. And then, I don't know, it won't be as bad if you get it. And then, but we got to look out for the older people around you, more vulnerable around you. Like, okay, so the goalpost moved, as they said, right?
Very much so, yes.
And then the booster came out, and then we had the Delta variant, and then the Omicron, and then that booster, and and more, it's becoming increasingly apparent, I would say, and if that's too strong a word, okay, but becoming pretty apparent that most of the stuff we were told was just bullshit. Right? It wasn't that safe. It wasn't that effective. It didn't stop the spread. It didn't do, arguably, conservatively, I mean, 80% of what they said it would do, it didn't do. Is that fair? Do you think?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, somewhere around that percentage. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now, in response, and people are becoming aware of this, and there's people who are beginning to have some health situations that they think might be related to it. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I don't know. But here's what's happening that I think is super fascinating and worth discussing now for future generations is the people who got it wrong are crying for amnesty, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe to back up a half step, one of the things I didn't cover is that people who spoke out against this, who were in the camp of, hey, if we don't know, let's lean towards more freedom and people can make their own individual choices. Those people were ostracized,
Oh yeah,
lost their jobs, lost their
that's right.
status. Doctors were like kicked out of medical institutions, banned from places like YouTube.
Yeah,
Again, big time status, financial credibility implications. People lost their practices because they were
yeah,
deemed charlatans for not going along with this stuff. Meanwhile, those people who were in the minority, who were ostracized, it turns out were more or less right.
yeah.
More often than the people who were saying that the things were gonna the cures were gonna work. Okay, so now people are going like, wait a second, that kind of sucks. That shouldn't have happened that way, and people are kind of waking up to it. And the people who are pushing for this thing are saying, yeah, but we didn't know any better. We should have some kind of amnesty. And before
Yeah.
I go too far, how is there anything you would supplement what I've said to are there important parts I missed or things that you think I might have got incorrect, or mostly is there anything that you think I missed that is like a pertinent piece of that story?
No, not really. I mean, I think that's the overarching, message being that there was, you either do what you're told or you are ostracized.
Yeah,
And that was pretty much trust the experts, trust the science.
that's science.
The
And
science.
Anthony Fauci was the science
The
according to
science.
him, right?
Trademark.
In one thing he said he was the science, if I
Yeah,
remember
that's
correctly.
right.
So
Right.
okay, so there was legal consequences, there was financial consequences, there was people being deplatformed, like not able to like have a voice and like speak in what was commonly being called the public square back then, which would
Right.
be social media and things like that. Okay, so now there's the beginnings of this cry coming from those who were imposing these consequences upon people who voiced contrarian opinions and saying, yeah, but we need to have some amnesty here. Like, we didn't know any better. We were doing the best we
Right.
could at the time. And here is the key piece that I think is really important for us to identify in a podcast like this, this is like the purpose of this podcast, in my opinion, is they're conflating two things that are not the same. One is, yeah, it's 100% true in the beginning. We didn't know what to do. We did want to by and large, I don't know anybody who wasn't really on board with like the 2 weeks to flatten the curve kind of thing.
Right.
Like, let's
Yeah.
just, all right, let's shut her down for a couple weeks. It's going to suck. You're going to be, spending quality time with your family you haven't done in a while. Okay, we can endure that because it's for the greater collective good. And then some people began to kind of sniff out some of this is maybe bullshit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the part that's being conflated is the people who are asking for amnesty now, whether it be pundits on TV shows or doctors that got it wrong or social media people or whatever, is they're conflating the part about how they got the medical part wrong and we didn't know what to do. And they're conflating that with the draconian and the steep consequences for not going along. And those are very separate things, but they're not treating them as very separate things. They're bundling it all together saying, well, this is just
Right.
this big, ugly, gnarly package of stuff that happened, but we didn't know any better. And my thing that I want to say, like maybe the most adamant about anything we've talked about for Kenny G in the future is this is a clear indication of people's motives. When that we didn't know, some people lean towards people should have no rights, and some people lean towards people should have rights.
That's right.
And there's no amnesty for that, and there shouldn't be. And these people who are wanting amnesty and for all to be forgiven won't even acknowledge that the part of their behavior that was the most grotesque was the part where they like deplatformed people and ruined their lives when nobody knew. Admittedly, now people are saying nobody knew what to do, but they said, who cares anyway? You don't go along with us. You don't deserve to have a job. You don't deserve to have a place
Right.
in the social square and all that kind of stuff. And they're not willing to separate that out and say, yeah, we didn't know the medical stuff. And we were taking, and everybody like did what they were going to do. And some people are like, hey, give me the shot, give me 5. And some people are like, I don't want anything to do with a shot. And that is fine. And I would agree with that. Like, make your own
Sure.
choice. The part that they don't acknowledge is in the midst of that, we also impose terrible consequences on people.
That's
And
right.
we're completely blinded by our self-righteousness and decided that what we thought should go for everyone. And if you want to be the surfer out in the Pacific Ocean, you should be arrested and put in jail for that. And people were saying things on TV like they shouldn't have medical services. If you go to the hospital,
Yeah.
you don't have the vaccine, you shouldn't even get medical treatment. You should die in
Right.
the parking lot. And
Right.
they were saying this kind of stuff. And that part is not even acknowledged.
Yeah, that's exactly the fine point that needs to be put on this whole COVID experience. Not that we didn't know, of course we didn't know, but that there was an obvious. It was almost like, if you don't agree with us, you're obviously a horrible human being.
Right.
If you don't agree with our approach, you're obviously a kook, a wacko. Even those that there was that Great Barrington Declaration. You remember that? There was, like,
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of professionals that said, there's some things here that really don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And the moves were made to strip them of their degrees and credentials and jobs and all of that type of stuff. There has yet to be, to my knowledge, there has yet to be an apology to those folks for
Right.
saying, well, maybe not everything you said was right, but we got a lot of stuff wrong of what we said about you, and you got a lot of stuff right about what you said about this, and
Yeah.
this notion that that those. And I think there's sort of two classes of folks here that were on that side. There was a class of folks that said, we can take this and we can use this for as much control as we want. And then there's other
Never
folks.
let a good opportunity go to waste, or never let a
Never
good
let a
crisis
good
go to
crisis
waste.
go to
Yeah,
waste.
yeah, yeah.
I'm a
Yep,
manual,
100%. Yep,
yeah, I'm a manual. Never let a good crisis go to waste. So there's those
100%.
folks. And then there's the masses that wanted to believe. They just want to believe in in some central good that has their best interest at heart. And
Yeah,
therefore, anybody that contradicts that central good is by definition a heretic or evil or whatever.
yeah,
COVID compliance really became a religion. It really became a religion,
yeah,
and those that violated that religion had everything happen to them that that heretics happened to them in previous
yeah,
eras. All sorts of excommunication, and that's
right.
where you're exactly right. That's where now, if the honest folks would say, look, we got it wrong and we got these things wrong, we didn't know, and we apologize for imposing our will on you. Now, I would respect anybody that came back to me and said, look, we imposed our will because we thought it was the right thing. It was the wrong thing. And we're sorry. And we'll never impose our will on you like that again. And secondarily, here are the things. This is what the government folks would do, the folks that have real power. If there was a recognition of the missteps that were made in terms of restricting people's freedom and people's ability to make choices for their own lives, for their families' lives, they would come back and say, we misstepped so badly in these restrictions that we put on, like the devastation that's been done to our children, to American and other people's children by
It's
closing down the
unbelievable.
schools. It's generational devastation. You could, I mean, by some figures, you would think that there's more devastation done to broader numbers of people. Yes, everybody who died, it's horrible, but there's even more people that were damaged by the response to COVID than
Yeah,
were impacted by COVID beyond the people that died. So the people that were in power that did these things, if they came back and said, Fauci came back and said, but we want to see things put in place so there is never an overreaction like this again. I would have some respect for
yes,
those folks. I would be able
yes,
to say, I get that you overreacted to the situation, and thank you for admitting your overreaction, and thank you for then taking the lead in ensuring there is no kind of draconian, centralized tyrannical reaction like that again. So if that
right.
happens, then I'll be interested in hearing how that happens. Haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and one of the things that's fascinating to me is to watch. Uh, I think it's mostly wealthy white women, and I don't hang out with those people, so it's maybe an
I
unfair
don't know any of those,
judgment.
Brian.
Right. I, my circle of friends is not full of wealthy white women that are in their, like they're living the large lifestyle. That's not
Right.
my group. But I see clips on TV of these women going to kind of the what the Chinese call them, the struggle sessions or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, the struggle sessions
Um,
from the Maoist times. Yes.
okay, so the wealthy white woman goes into this place where she announces that she's a racist because she's white and she has privilege, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
okay. How would you describe the level of humiliation, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but how would you describe the level of um, discomfort they have to go through to be cleansed of that?
Oh yeah, I mean that would be those the things they have to go through. It is humiliation,
Yeah,
the level of personal degradation. Essentially, you have to empty yourself of any sense of pride or self worth to do
yeah.
that, and that's the penance you're
Okay.
supposed to pay.
So that's the standard. That's the cleansing mechanism that's in vogue right now for people who are wealthy. They literally pay thousands of dollars to go to some place where they have these
Humiliate themselves.
self-imposed struggle sections, right? So
Yeah,
the standard is that's the degree of humiliation for being wrong on something like this. However, contrast that with the level of discomfort, the people who were saying things like if you don't get the shot, you shouldn't get medical treatment. They have zero interest in having any even acknowledgement that they said those
yeah,
things. They
yeah.
they they tie that statement to, yeah, it was a medical thing. We didn't know any better. No,
Right,
it wasn't a medical thing. Separate from the medical thing, there was a here's how we treat people who don't go along with the story we want told,
right.
and here's how those people should be treated, which is the opposite of what the struggle session is from the
Yeah,
same group of people. And I find that just like so fascinating that the same people who will say, I was born white and I have money and privilege, I have to go pay to go through this humiliation process. And because I'm self righteous when I'm done with that and I'm cleansed, and I will in no way acknowledge the hateful and cruel things I said about people who are unvaccinated and how they deserve to die in the streets. And I don't care. Not even on the radar of like acknowledging that, let alone apologize for it.
yeah. Well, and there's where you can tell if somebody's honest or not. If
Right.
somebody's honest, they're because you're right, they're conflating a reaction to knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly willing to say that I mean, what was it? The vaccine came out in like September or October, something like that.
Yeah, that
First
sounds
first
right.
bits. The whole thing started in the early part of the
It
year,
was
about
it was before
March.
the election. I'm pretty positive of that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm perfectly willing to grant a significant period of time, 8, 9, 10 months
Yeah.
of yeah, we really have no clue what we're doing. So now, so the first lesson to learn for Kenichi in the future is, um, grant people time when they don't know, but make sure that when they don't know, they don't say that they do know. So
Right.
that's number one. Number two, is after that time, if they say they do know, then make sure that they're going to provide more than just an assurance that we're the experts. I want to know
Yeah.
how you know. Now, you're not
Right.
a scientist, Dave. I'm not a medical
Hey,
doctor.
they're educated. They have high degrees from places
Degrees.
like Yale and places you wouldn't be allowed to set foot on the campus.
Yeah,
That's
that's right.
how they
Well, I
know.
probably wouldn't be allowed to set foot on those campuses, but that's probably
I
for
don't know. You
different
show your
reasons.
Evergreen State card. You're probably okay.
Oh, that's right. No, I don't. I think Evergreen State's too far gone for even them. Well, but and so I think if you then extend that out and say that you can tell the honest ones that after that period of time, after some period of time, if people say, well, we've been studying it for 10 months now, we've got this vaccine, here's what we think might happen, but we're not really sure. I would
Right.
respect somebody who said that.
Yes.
I would respect
Yep.
somebody who said that. Here's why we want you to do what we want you to do. Here's our reasoning for that, but it's up to
Yeah.
you to decide that. Now,
Right.
that is a response that I will respect. Now, we've gone through this once. There's every culture claims this saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. We've gone through
Yeah.
this once. I think when and if this comes around again, now the next one that comes around could be a literal, world-ending virus. It could be. I don't know.
Yeah. For sure.
But I guarantee you this, because people are not stupid, because there's a degree of sentience in our society, people recognize the things that you and I are talking about now, which, 2 or 3 years ago would have been considered heresy. But
Yeah.
people recognize the things we're talking about now are basic realities, except the
Yeah.
people that don't want to admit their role in those circumstances. And so if the world ending one does come around, our response to it next time will be significantly more standoffish than it would have been if they just said, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we think you should do, but it's up to you to decide.
Right. Yeah. And that, and for those who say, well, it's easy for you to say this stuff now, Brian, I want to clarify a couple things. So I did not take the vaccine, and I'm going to give you the two reasons why I didn't do it. And these are things that happen in the moment that are easily verifiable. The first thing is, you can't watch a commercial, and I don't know, 20% of the ads on TV conservatively are for some kind of medication, like
Yes, they
maybe
are these
80%.
days.
Let's say 20% conservatively. A lot of ads on TV are about medications, right?
Yeah.
There's not a single one I can think of that doesn't have at the end of it a 3 to 15-second diatribe of all the ailments that can come along with it, up into and including death and
Yes,
diarrhea and all
that's
kinds
right.
of horrible things, right? That is, it's a laughable part of these commercials, like,
Yes, it
and it's
is.
very noticeable. Like the end of it is always like, and they speed up how fast the things, they record it at normal speed and they speed up so they can get the disclaimers in there really fast, like whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a known part of the commercial. Okay, the vaccine comes along, and not only was there not the disclaimers, there was not the discussion of potential things that could be a disclaimer were
Right.
not even allowed to be discussed.
Right.
And that was a 180-degree turn from what is quote unquote normal for us. And
Right.
that was when I started going, wait a second here. This is very, very different. I forget the medical stuff for a second.
Yeah.
Just how they're treating this is 180 degrees different than any other medication they present. And the second thing is, actually, I'm going to share three things. The second thing is, when it was Trump's vaccine, there's no shortage of people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and all these people saying, I won't get the Trump vaccine. It hasn't been properly tested and blah. There's no way you could have a thing come out that fast and have it be safe and blah, 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 blah. And then what do you know? After the election and Joe Biden wins, all those people also did 180 degrees. So that was the second thing that told me, like, it seems like some of the stuff they're saying might just be bullshit. Like maybe they're
Right.
just making this stuff up, right?
Right.
And then the third thing for me personally, this is where it got to be more of a personal thing, is I have a family history of heart problems. And there was whispers of this myocarditis thing that, again,
Right.
you
That's
couldn't
right.
talk about. And if you talked about it, you were banned from YouTube and you were banned from Facebook and you were banned
Right.
from Twitter, and doctors lost practice, like $1 million practices over saying that there might be a thing about myocarditis.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, given all the other variables, I'd rather take my chances with a flu-like thing where I have a really high batting average of not really getting that sick from those kinds of things than I would something that's going to make my potential for a heart problem worse, given
Right.
my family's history for that.
Right.
And so those are the reasons I didn't do it. Now, when I started pushing back and saying, like, I don't want to help anybody decide what to do on their own medical stuff. I think they should make their own choices. Those are the reasons I made my choice.
Sure.
And my family all made similar choices. And how people come up with their answer is none of my business. But I was vocal about saying, we are all saying we don't know. And at the same time, we're saying we're going to err on the side of you doing less things that you would normally do with your life,
Right.
like going to the beach and going outdoors, and these, like, going to the gym, for crying out loud. Like, these are
Right.
stupid things, right?
Right.
And so the reaction I got was not people saying, hey, I respect your ability and rights to make your own medical decision. We just agree upon, like, if we're going to err, would we err on the side of caution? We just err
Right.
on the side of independence, which, again, I would respect somebody who said that. And I
Sure.
would have
You
a
bet.
conversation with them, a meaningful conversation.
Right.
What I got instead was, and I have the messages, because they're Facebook messages, they don't go away.
Yep.
And I have screenshots of them now. I have messages from people saying, guys like you are why my grandma died, who was
Yeah.
93 and a half years old or whatever. And I'm not making that up. Like, there's
Yeah.
a person who said that guys like me were why her grandmother was no longer with us. And there was
Yeah.
another person who said guys like me were why she couldn't go see her sick grandmother. And we're probably the reason that she got sick in the first place also. And this was months into the thing, right? And so back to the thing about, I get the part we didn't know medically how to handle this. I totally
Right.
can wrap my head around that. And I don't hold anybody responsible for that. We didn't know what we didn't know.
Right.
And some experts would have varying degrees of confidence and experience and things like that. Okay, I can wrap my head around that part even. I can't wrap my head around the part where we don't know, and we're going to determine for everyone how you should live your life and the consequences that should come if you don't follow along. And if you don't like that part, even there's consequences for not liking that part. And that
Yeah.
is the part that they aren't even acknowledging. And I am not interested in a single conversation about quote unquote amnesty until they do. If
Yeah.
somebody's beating my niece, like she gets married to somebody who's beating my niece, I don't forgive the guy until he says I won't do that anymore, and I'm sorry I
Right.
did the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. There should always be an equal amount of of prescriptive and knowledge following along the same lines. And by that I mean, to whatever degree we are certain about something is the degree that I'm interested in hearing about your certainty about what I should do. But
Yeah,
there was none of that. And the two things that really threw me off, number one, as you know, I'm a data guy. I look at Google Analytics and all sorts of data all the
not
time.
the robot from Star Trek. Like
No,
you
not
like
well.
information. But
I wish, I wish I had that
okay,
level of intellect, but I
gotcha.
don't.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not there
Just
yet.
making sure I'm on pace here. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I'm not quite there yet. He's eternally young too. I'm not quite there. So there was a lot of reporting about certain pieces of data throughout that entire time. There was noticeably absent a reporting about things that would have basic conclusions that would have been very, very interesting to me throughout that entire period of time, even when you went and looked at various databases. There was an active effort to exclude data from the public view of
yeah,
things that would tell you how serious this really is and
yeah.
how many people are being affected and what age range people.
What
You had
age?
to
What
really, really,
comorbidities? All that stuff. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
hundred
you
percent.
really had to dig to find that. Now, either
Yeah,
one of two things: either we don't have very good data tools in this society, which I know is not true because I use them every single day, or
yeah,
people were excluding data to keep us in the dark about some things. Now, they would say, and I'm sure they believe this. You don't have to say it's a big dark conspiracy. You can say that they were excluding us because they think we're too stupid to know it. Now, that's maybe that's a conspiracy, or maybe it's just people think they're better than we are, and therefore we should know some certain things because they wanted to prescribe things for our lives. That's pretty much out in the open. It's not
yeah,
conspiratorial at all. That's just out in the open and how they thought about us during that period of time. That is not a and that's something that those people that were involved in that should and need to come back and say, look, from now on, we're going to be transparent with data on these things and let you make the conclusions. The second thing was when people came out with disagreements. If somebody disagrees with you and I on this podcast, we invite them to come disagree with
yeah.
us. Come tell us.
Yep,
Tell us where we got it wrong. But
yep.
if you disagreed with the predominant view, even if you were a highly credentialed expert in the field, if
Expert in this particular field. Yeah,
in immunology, in virology, and
yeah,
all of these things. If
yeah,
you
yeah,
disagreed with any of the conclusions or with any of the data, you were not allowed to speak. This is this is the essence of where free speech should come in.
right.
For better or for worse, let people know the data and let them then make their own decisions and suffer the consequences or benefit from that as a
Yeah,
society. That's
yeah.
where the draconian measures came
Well,
in.
and those people, I believe, again, you tell me if I'm wrong, but those people would say, "Well, it's not fair. We should have to suffer the consequences. We didn't know any better." And but those are the same people who say you should suffer the consequences for your privilege, and I should suffer the consequences
Right,
for my privilege. And
right.
we should change, we should change how we look at things because other people need us to. Again, when it's not their tribe, they're all over that repentance
Yeah,
and and cleansing yourself of wrongdoing, whether you actively did anything wrong or not. You're just born in the wrong skin. Like they're all over that stuff.
yeah,
But when it comes to them acknowledging they're nowhere near that. And for people who are wondering now or 70 years from now, how could a guy like me be so adamant about my position and my values? This is why.
yeah.
As you said, if they're not honest about this stuff, I have no really interest in like participating in whatever they want me to do.
Right,
If they're
right.
not honest, I don't want to listen to them and like not go to the gym. I don't want to listen to them about not going to restaurant. I don't want to listen about stepping over needles and feces in the streets of San Francisco or Seattle. Like, I don't listen about any of this stuff because they're not honest about things. And I'm not interested in wasting my time with people who aren't honest. Now, does that mean there aren't people who are quote unquote conservative that aren't liars? Of course there are. But the degree those people have to force lockdowns or oust people from society is not, it's so minuscule, it's not even measurable. I
Right.
can't think of an instance, maybe you can. I can't think of an instance where a conservative person can punt somebody from society for disagreeing with a conservative thought. I don't know where that's a thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is, and I think all of this goes back to a differential in values. It goes back to a
Yes.
values question. The values question, the place where we would put our values is where traditional American values were: give me liberty or give me death. So
Yeah.
it's freedom of thought, it's freedom of expression, it's freedom to say the things that I want to say, as a top freedom. Now, that is not a top value of those that want to enforce conformity and obedience to the expert class that runs the state. So
Right.
that's where the disconnect is. Well, how could they do this? Well, they can do it because even if they're wrong, and the reason they shouldn't, in their minds, I'm going to project here a little bit. The reason that they will not repent of the obvious now. I mean, we've got enough data to show that what half this stuff, more than half this stuff, was just ridiculous. Um, the reason they won't repent is because it is in contradistinction to their top value, which is we run things. And even if we're wrong, we still need to run things because you
Yeah.
can't run things yourself. And if you say things
Yes.
that contradict this, you are immoral, you're unethical, even if you have the facts on your side.
Yeah. And here's where we go back to my old friend, my belief that I'm sure this saying's been around for thousands of years, probably. How you do anything is how you do everything.
Yeah.
So Fauci was in, what was the department he was in charge of? What's
Oh, well, he was infectious disease with
there's like a
NIH.
3-letter thing
NIH.
he's in charge. NIH. Okay. So
NIH, yeah.
I would be willing to bet a substantial amount of my personal wealth or income that how the NIH runs is not much different than how the CIA runs, which is probably not that much different than how the SEC runs
Yeah,
or the Department of Education or the Department of Labor, et cetera. Like these government institutions probably all kind of run the same way,
right.
right?
Oh, I would think so,
And
yes.
so and even including Congress
Yeah.
and things like that, right? So, for example, we are seeing in the January 6th committee the
Hmm.
same kinds of behaviors we saw from the NIH about this kinds of stuff. There's how we portray or how our legal system works in how our congressional hearings work in everyday run of the mill things. And then there was this show where we hired Hollywood producers to come in
Right.
and like help us with editing and sound effects and all this stuff. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, one of these things is different than the other, just like the commercial I see for whatever medication that cures, you know, acid reflux also
Right.
can kill you. Like
Right. Yes.
there's disclaimers on that. And then the COVID vaccine comes out and there's no discussion of any possible side effects. Just like that, in these other institutions, there's how we normally do things, and then here's how we do it in this instance. But if you notice that there's differences there, you're the problem, and
Right.
you need to be quiet because that would be malinformation, which is I'm learning it might be factually correct, but it's not. It makes the government look bad, and therefore
Right.
it's bad. And my point is, all these institutions, whether maybe even Hollywood, for sure, like government institutions, this is kind of the MO.
Yeah.
And so it people like me, or I'll just speak for me, like I'm less inclined to believe them, not more inclined to believe them when they demonstrate the same behaviors that have shown people who are searching for a narrative or an outcome that is not valuing honesty
Right.
and like scientific measures and
Yeah.
data and calculating information and things like that as a significant part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's and part of that entire process is also when you're past a certain period of time, you are now, well, a couple things. One, when's the last time you heard Dr. Fauci speak? He's vanished.
I have two answers to that. One is I've not heard him speak live in, I don't know, a year, maybe more. But
Yeah.
one of my favorite things, though, I have to say, like
Yeah.
I don't, I try not to be a vindictive person. I think I do a reasonably good job with that. But one of my favorite things, absolutely, is those montages of videos of him saying things like, "I didn't say to shut the country down," and then 2 seconds later, "We need to shut the country
Right.
down," and like,
Right.
"I didn't do this," and then him like
Past. Yeah.
that might be my favorite pastime on the internet right now.
Well, yeah. Well, and there's lots of that. So, do you remember his cohort, the people that were with him on the national level? Do you remember their names?
Yeah, I remember. I can't. I can picture the blonde gal. I can't remember her
So there
name.
was Dr. Birx.
Yep, Dr.
So
Birch, and then yeah,
my point is that the people that dominated our entire lives for several years on a day-to-day basis have vanished. They've vanished since this is
right.
over. Number two, and there's a pattern here, and this pattern repeats itself in not just this situation, but you go back historically, it repeats itself in these situations. Number two, we're talking about this stuff now, and a lot of people will respond to the way we're talking about this now is, oh, COVID, that's few. Why are you bringing that up? That's all
Move
old
on.
news.
Yeah,
Move on. Move on. Just let's move past this. We've got bigger fish to fry now.
yeah.
All these. So the
we got bigger fish. The next big crisis they created is the bigger fish. There's no question.
right. It's whatever the current crisis. So the point being, you can tell that the entire superstructure of the thing is dishonest when it's dealt with in a dishonest way from the beginning to the end. From the
Right.
beginning to no, that's so last year. Well, what did we didn't know, or yeah, as you said, we didn't know. But not only we didn't know, but you questioning what happened back then, you're obviously ignoring the systemic racism that's such a big part of our society now by talking about
Yeah.
this, you privileged white guy.
Yeah. Well, you're a little more kind than I am. Like you said that you would be willing to forgive those folks if they said, "Hey, we're sorry we did that and we won't do it again." So you give them more grace than me. What I will nearly require is them to say, "Yes, we did this atrocious thing and we're sorry that happened, and here's why we're sorry that happened, and here's the consequences we know that happened, and here is specifically how we will keep this from happening in the future. But if we violate it in the future, here's what we expect everyone to do."
Sure. Well, I
And
would go along
and
with that. No problem.
if we get that, then I will start listening to all these people again. And
Yeah.
I'm not being facetious. I'm not being
Yeah.
funny. Like short of
Yeah.
that, like I don't really care what their opinions are because they can promise they're going to do this again all day long. But guess what? They're doing it again in like the Department of Education stuff. Like
Yeah.
we're seeing it in the legal system, in the again, I'm no like rabid Trump fan, but you can see in the things that involve
Oh, yeah.
him
Yeah.
in all kinds of arenas that there's shades of truth that we're willing to work within there that we're not willing to work within in other things just like that. And one thing is not like the other. And when you notice those things, you're the problem.
Yeah. Well, and the reason it won't happen, the reason none of what, either variation of what you said or I said won't happen is because for those things to happen, there would have to be an admission that things were done according to a narrative rather than letting the
Right.
facts lead, rather than letting the facts say, here's where we need to go. And, science is supposed to just follow where the facts lead. It doesn't really matter. We're going to
Right.
do an experiment. We think this is going to happen. It didn't happen at all. Okay, we're changing our hypothesis. So the
Yeah.
narrative says, we're going to do an experiment. Here's where we think it's going to go. Well, it didn't go that way, but the narrative is still true. So, as long as there is no admission that the driving force, the operating system, if you will, of how society moved forward was according to a narrative-driven process, then we're never going to have any change. We're never going to have any change as long as it's driven by a narrative. And
Yeah.
so what they would have to come back and say is, well, we're going to take it day by day. We're going to say, here's what we think today, here's what we think you should do today, but tomorrow we might change everything because we learned something new, and it won't be driven by a narrative. So, and of
Yeah.
course, to give up the narrative is to give up power because people will buy
Right.
into a narrative. Human beings are, one of the things that we should know, and Kenny G should know, is that human beings are attracted to easy to digest and understand narratives. because they
Yeah.
explain the world around us. We don't want to believe, human beings, you and I and anybody, we don't want to believe that the world is a
We're
chaotic
we're
place.
infatuated with the premise of having control.
Yes, yes, exactly. And control and understanding. Those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
If we understand how everything works out there, then we have a better chance of controlling those things, and there's less chaos in our lives, and we feel more secure. And so that sort of narrative driven thing is very appealing to people. And those that would exercise control know that if they can spin a great narrative, they can control maybe a vast majority of people, maybe a slim
Yeah.
majority, but a majority of people.
Well, and if you can make the consequences for not going along steep enough, then some people just are, they just won't.
Yeah.
They won't risk it because again, there's very good
It's not worth
doctors
it.
probably who probably said, yeah, I know this is all a bunch of bullshit, but I have to go along because I got a family and I got
Right.
27 years into building my practice. I'm 3 years from retirement. I'm not going to give all that up over this. Like
Right.
I have other considerations to factor in, and I get that. I think that it's, as I'm thinking through what you were saying there, one of the things that we talk about is like the cyclical nature of this stuff, and I'm imagining like in 1946, let's say, there were no, the grudges had all been settled. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
Like in the 30s, there was a great uprising. I mean, we don't talk about this a lot because the Great Depression and World War II like overshadowed everything. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of infighting in the country in the United States about communism versus free
Yeah.
market
Right.
stuff.
That's true.
And there was people like, as Neil Howe puts it, like if you were conservative, you thought the 30s was like the worst decade ever because
Yeah.
of the way that FDR was like imposing like things and removing personal liberties and things like that. And if you're not a conservative, you're like, hey, we're finally making some progress around here, right?
Right.
So my point is, then we would we go through this tumultuous time of 10 years or whatever, in World War II included, all that stuff, and all the scores are settled, right? Everybody left that era, the World War II era, like on an even playing field,
Yeah.
right? And it feels like over time, over the 80 years that have followed, there's been groups that have widened, and now there's this need to like tip the scales one way or the other to make, quote unquote, make things fair, to even the odds, or to
Yeah.
resolve disparities or whatever. And I imagine in 15 years we will have gone through a period where the scales will be even again.
Yeah.
And the consequences, like, people will just be tired of fighting, and they'll be tired of, like, I mean, like, literally fighting and
Yeah.
also figuratively fighting.
Yeah.
And it kind of, does that kind of feel like the way it is to you as well? Like, where these scores are settled and like everybody's on, like, imagine 1950, 1958, 1950, 1962, even
Oh
up
yeah.
until around 1968, everyone's on the level playing field. There was no need to do that stuff. And then boom, 1968 happens, and like the world changes, right? Or it might have been 64, somewhere in there, right?
Well,
Maybe after JFK.
it's progressive. It's progressive. I think.
Yeah.
And that and it's repetitive and it's progressive, and it happened that way before, where there was you face a great crisis, everybody takes a big sigh of relief, and suddenly the differences between Brian and Dave don't matter so much anymore
Right.
because we just survived being killed by Hitler. So,
Right.
or being enslaved by Hitler,
Yeah.
or we just survived the complete dissolution of the country during the
Yeah.
Civil War.
And through this extreme hardship, we found out that we're more alike than we are different.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result of that, we're tired of fighting. We see the world a little bit clearer than we did before. Now that doesn't mean that it's a kumbaya moment and everybody's
Right.
everybody's treated perfectly or anything like that. It's not the
Right.
case. Never has been the case. Never will be the case.
Right.
But then it gradually over time disintegrates as we forget what that great thing that we faced, that we overcame, that we realized was a big thing. And a lot of the stuff that we think now are big things are not quite as big things as we might think they are,
Right.
until we face that next crisis again.
Yeah. And the next crisis, the trigger, the mechanics of how it unfolds are always different.
Yes.
So it always feels like, well, this isn't the same thing as that, because this is different. Like, COVID's not the same thing as the Great Depression.
Right.
COVID's not the same thing as the stock market crash of 1929. But the mechanics of how these things play out, the specific variable is different, but the mechanics of how people react to it are always the same.
Yes.
People want control, they want status, they want power, they want influence, they want wealth, and they do whatever is necessary to get those things. And we say, well, that they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that about medicine. They wouldn't do that about a vaccine and people's health. They wouldn't do that, would they? Just like they probably said they wouldn't put Jews in like ovens and like
Right.
they wouldn't do that, would they? Like we, it seems like we keep coming back to this. Like, we're just befuddled and like bewildered by this idea that people would actually do these things when history is full of instances where we do these things.
Well, and it's because, and this is one of the things I think is so important to understand, and we've talked about this over and over and over, and I want to keep emphasizing this, that it's the unchangeable portions of human nature that cause these things to be the way that they are. It's the
Right.
internal things that happen within human beings, the desire for power, for control, for organization, the desire to feel better about oneself, because even though it means feeling worse about somebody else or making somebody feel worse about themselves, these these are parts of human nature that have existed now, that existed during World War II, that existed during the Reformation period, the 1500s. They existed in 600 AD or 600 BC. They've always existed, and the external circumstances continue to play out because and the external circumstances are different in how they play out each time, but the internal motivations of what happens within individuals and within societies at large is by and large the same. It's by and large the same kind of motivations. And this is why, and it's hard to face those motivations. And this is why, for instance, as we talk about this past COVID situation, that people will address we didn't know this scientific fact or that scientific fact. They're willing to address the superficial portions of it, but not address the internal dysfunction of the human creature or of the human society, because that, first of all, it's a lot harder to address that and really admit that, hey, I'm a sinner and this is a problem and I did this wrong thing. That's a lot harder to admit.
A whole lot easier to tell your grandkids, I don't understand how viruses work. We were just doing the best we could than tell your grandkids, in the absence of data, I just tell people to stay home and do what they're told or I'm going to crush them.
Right. Yeah. Well, because that gets to the personal, that gets to who we are as people.
Yeah.
It's the whole idea of distracting with facts, right? Distracting with, look at this chart, look at it, that's really the problem. And this is where Kenny G and everybody between now and the end of time really needs to get a clear, if you want to understand the world, you have to understand human nature, and you have to understand it not from a narrative point of view. Most people want to think of human nature from a narrative point of view, from the point of view of if my political policies or my social programs are successful, human nature will be changed in this way and we'll do away with greed and poverty and war and all. Baloney. Just sheer baloney. These are things that come from inside of us that no government program is going to change, that your social program is not going to change. The best we can do with these external things is to put guardrails around human nature to make sure it doesn't get out of whack. It doesn't get out of control.
Well, that's exactly the kind of thing an uneducated guy who did not go to Yale would say, because you don't have the perspective to understand how smart people can do those things that you're saying are not possible.
Yeah, that's right.
If guys like you would just get out of the way of smart people who have amassed this education and wealth of knowledge, who can make decisions that can overcome human nature, man, life would be a whole lot better.
Then we'd have utopia.
The sooner you recognize that, the better.
Then we'd have utopia, just like Plato said, right? Some people think that Plato wrote his utopia as an ideal that humans could strive to. A lot of people think that Plato wrote his utopia kind of as a tongue-in-cheek indication of how human nature really is. This can't be achieved with human beings, and that was true in the BC era as well as in the AD era.
Yeah, what's funny is I'm like, of course, mocking these folks because it's mockable in my opinion. I kind of sort of feel bad about it, but not really. But what's funny is these are the people who criticize people for believing in God,
right?
But these are the people who are trying to present themselves as so educated that there's no being above them, which would make them God.
Which would make them God. Yes, yeah.
So they're they're indirectly trying to compete with God and scoffing and mocking folks who believe in God, while also simultaneously trying to present them as God,
Right.
because nobody would be smarter than them. Like, collectively, there's nobody smarter
Yeah.
than the people who've graduated from Yale.
Yeah.
Like, that's the smartest bunch of people that ever could have been. And if us rubes just get out of the way and let them figure stuff out, like, man, the world would be a great place.
Yeah.
That kind of sounds like an agreement that another entity has made.
Well,
which
yes.
I don't know, like, hey, here's the Bible, and like, here's the story of Adam and Eve all the way through a whole bunch of stuff. And like, hey, here's the agreement. If you do the stuff I'm asking you to do, like, we have a good deal. And if you don't, we don't. Like, it kind of sounds like the same kind of thing, doesn't it, Dave?
Well, it is, and it's a speaking of narratives, it is a recurring and this is not even a narrative; it's a theme. This is
Yeah.
a theme that inevitably plays out, and that's why and that's why it's important to understand the theme, to understand the counter narratives and the falsehoods of the counter narratives, because if you the, reality asserts itself, right? We always we discuss this. Reality always asserts itself. It always wins,
Yep.
and the counter
Yep.
narrative is counter to reality, and therefore it ends in why is crisis inevitable? Crisis is inevitable because human beings and our nature drive us to it each time over and over
Right.
again. That's
Yeah.
so that theme
Yeah,
is
it's funny that all these things are just parallels. Like, if you look back in time when there was 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, when there was widespread belief in different kinds of gods and multiple
right.
gods and whatever. Like, if you believe in that God, like, we're gonna kill you or put you in our prison or whatever. And it's fascinating to me that what they again the Ivy League educated people who are like the Faucis and the Birxes of the world, like these people who are in these positions because of their status and education and whatever, they mock people who have those beliefs in a God, but they do the same behaviors as the people 2,500 years
Yeah.
ago and say, if you don't believe the way we do, we're putting you in prison and we're killing you.
That's right. That's right.
It's so ironic.
That's right. And that's why it's important to recognize these things, and that's why we bequeath this to Kenny G so he can understand. Because I don't know whether we're going to have George Jetson flying cars in the 2100.
I saw a drone the other day that had like a parachute. If like if the propellers quit going, they had like a parachute deployed automatically. It looked pretty George Jetson to me.
Well, I suspect we'll have some very cool things in the future, but I also suspect that human beings will pretty much still be human beings, and that we will still repeat our same mistakes over again, because that's what we do.
One thing I can assert for sure, no matter what vehicles we're in 100 years from now, the government will be screwing something up. That much I'm confident I can say.
That's a constant as long as we've had governments, isn't it?
It's a constant as long as we've had governments in this world, right?
It's true.
All right. As Dave mentioned, go check us out at unsilentpodcast.com. We'd love to hear where you think we're completely missing the boat here. Especially in this topic, like, how do we describe it incorrectly? If we describe something incorrectly about how the COVID lockdowns happen and the vaccine narratives shifting and all that kind of stuff, I'd love to hear how you think that went down differently than what we described. Again, go to unsilentpodcast.com. The Rumble channel has a great place to leave comments. That's a fantastic place to leave your opinions. Until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.